Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this Trials at Home webinar. My name is Dwayne Schultes. I'm the Managing Director of Vital Transformation. I'm also the co-lead in Trials at Home's Work Package Code, the communication part. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today, we'll be discussing where we are 2 years down the road since the launch of Trials at Home. And thank you very much for joining us today. Now, before we get started, if you're having connection problems, if you're having bandwidth issues, we have supplied several dozen telephone numbers for you. Some of them are even toll free. Please push the little button next to the mute on your panel. The box will pop up and you can choose one of the several dozen phone numbers that we've provided. Please feel free to do so. We don't want you to miss anything in the conversation. As well, we will be taking your questions. We've had a very good turnout today. Again, thank you for being here. We do want your questions. If you have questions on the project, how you can get involved, something about what's going on, please push the Q&A button in the menu. This box will pop up and we will take your questions and we will work through them as we get to the Q&A. We should have about 25 to 30 minutes of Q&A towards the end of the webinar. So again, thank you for being here. So 2 years ago, 200 people from more than 30 organizations gathered in Paris to launch Trials at Home. In this webinar today, we'll highlight Trials at Home's recent successes in its publications, decentralized clinical trial recommendations, and interactions with regulators. We'll also share details of the Radial project, that's our clinical trial that we'll conduct, and also give you a sneak peek on what's in store for the next 3 years. And I'm very pleased to be joined by an exceptional panel of folks. Again, I'd like to introduce Mira Zoetgeest, who's our project lead from Utrecht University. Hello, Mira. How are you doing?
Hi, Dwayne.
Thank you, Mira. Kim Hawkins from Sanofi, another project lead. Hello, Kim. How are you?
Hello, Dwayne.
Also, we're joined by Rick Groba, also from Utrecht, another project lead. Hello, Rick. How are you doing today?
Hi, Dwayne.
And we're also, thank you. And we're also joined by Tim DeSmet from UCB, who is running project lead for EAGLE, which is our clinical trial project. Hello, Tim. How are you, sir?
Hi, Dwayne. Doing fine, thanks.
Thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Rick, who's going to give us an overview of the project. Rick, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Dwayne. Thank you all for joining this webinar. It's great to see so many online. And it's indeed a pleasure to speak a few introductory words on Trials at Home, which is now 2 years running and another 3 to go. And so far, it has been, for many reasons, a very exciting journey. Lots of learnings. The first phases of the project have been accomplished, notably an inventory of what is around in terms of remote decentralized clinical trials, but also the technology that is available and that might or may not be used in rolling out remote decentralized clinical trials. All preparatory work for a pilot, of which you will hear more in today's webinar. Again, lots of learnings. The first publications are coming out and many more to come. We'll give you some insights during this webinar, and I'm sure you'll be watching us closely. It also has been a very exciting consortium, not only good work that's being done, but also fun to interact with these people. And even though we are now in sort of virtual times, I feel we're very much part of a community. By the way, there's still room for you to join. So if parties would be interested in linking to our consortium, there's still opportunities for that. And you'll get some info down the road during this webinar. So for now, again, thank you for joining us, being here, showing interest in these important developments. And I'd like to invite Kim Hawkins now to kick off the presentations.
Thanks so much, Rick. I really appreciate it. So hi again, Kim Hawkins. I'm with Sanofi and here today as co-lead of the IMI project, the Trials at Home IMI project. I'm really happy to be here today to share with you some of our key achievements and accomplishments from the first 2 years of the project. On the next slide, I want to highlight first and foremost, we've had 2 publications come out so far. One in clinical pharmacology and therapeutics that was evaluating the regulatory guidance across the EU on the management of clinical trials during the pandemic. And the other in the British Journal of Clinical Pharmacology was an analysis of interviews with trial personnel, patient representatives, and other key stakeholders. So just to highlight, both of these are posted on our Trials at Home website, and I highly encourage you to go take a look at those. We've also really engaged with an extensive stakeholder engagement platform. This has included interactions with regulators, which you'll hear a little bit more about today, patients, healthcare practitioners, and other key stakeholders to help guide us on our journey. We've made really great progress in defining our pilot study. We now have a great catchy name, a well-defined study design, and a clear path forward to open up this trial next year. And finally, we have our expert patient panel up and running. This has been a big accomplishment, and they've started to provide input into the program, including critical feedback into the Radial protocol. So on the next slide, a key deliverable that we wanted to highlight from the first 2 years of the project is the initial set of recommendations on DCTs. So these recommendations were drafted based on an extensive evidence gathered through 2 main sources. First, there was a systematic literature review that's been conducted to identify ongoing and completed trials using remote methods, as well as to summarize the current state of the DCT landscape. The second key source was selected case studies of clinical trials using remote methods from within the Trials at Home consortium and beyond. So really unpublished, for the most part, case studies that were contributed by consortium partners. This case study analysis has led to has included in-depth interviews with key study personnel who were running these trials, as well as other key stakeholders, including our patient representatives. So out of this analysis, we had a couple of main themes that emerged. The first really was to keep the focus on the participants when making decisions about study design and conduct. And this really includes incorporating the patient voice and the patient experience into the trial design and support these activities throughout the length of the study. The second is to make sure that you're beginning with a very valuable research question that's going to bring value to the patients and to the general public. And the third is to simplify the patient experience with DCTs while maintaining quality and scientific rigor. So again, at the bottom of this slide, you can see there's a link listed where you can go and have access to this document that is quite lengthy. This is just a summary of some of the key recommendations. On the next slide, again, at the top of the slide, you can see the link to the full document. But this is a summary view of the criteria for selection of appropriate trials for DCT, which was another key deliverable and tool coming out of the initial years of the project. On the left side, you can see the different categories and stages of a clinical trial and the corresponding aspects to consider when designing DCTs. Then on the right side is an example of the step-by-step decision aid for each category or trial stage. So for example, in the setup and design category, the document walks the user through a decision matrix that's based on the key factors to consider in the design and setup, such as the research question, the patient population, the intervention, the exact outcome measures that will be studied, and any regulatory considerations. And really the goal of the tool is to help the user decide what the best fit is for their individual study, for their individual circumstances, and their individual patients. On the next slide is an example of one case study that was collected through the consortium and how these learnings are being used. So this study was in diabetes. It was using an insulin product to evaluate a traditional clinic-based clinical trial, that's the top arm, compared to an almost fully remote arm, which is the bottom arm. To remember, this study was conducted in 2017, and overall, as you can see on the right, the goal was to recruit 150 patients, and the study had to be ended early because recruitment was not being met. I think one important point to call out is that the remote arm did have one on-site clinic visit at the start of the study. The remote arm used many aspects of DCT, including e-consent. There was direct to patient, both medication shipment and device shipment, as well as remote endpoint visits. The key endpoint measures that were evaluated in this case study were patient satisfaction, patient burden, healthcare utilization, as well as compliance, disease control, and, most importantly, safety evaluations. So on the next slide, just briefly, we took all of our case studies and we really, through our interviews, tried to look at what the key challenges were, and how perhaps in the future we could upgrade these case studies and maybe mitigate for some of these challenges. So a couple of key challenges were identified here. We had frequent technical challenges, really. This was experienced by both the sites as well as the patients, and included errors with data syncing, video conferencing, and really having too many new technologies introduced at the same time. So in upgrading this case study, really the use of mature technology, as well as providing very strong staff and patient support for the technology could have helped this trial. A second key challenge was that the staff was really approaching, and this was both sort of on the sponsor end and the site end, really the staff was approaching the trial planning and the regulatory procedures in very different ways. And some proposed mitigations here were to think about establishing very clear communication and collaboration roles, laying out the responsibilities, as well as the channels of communication, as well as any escalations that are needed. And again, going back to some of the key recommendations is to keep the patient experience central in the design process, and to remember that reducing burden and supporting patients really is our ultimate goal. A third challenge that we experienced was really selecting technology, and maybe technology vendors that didn't have expertise in the clinical trials. And so in many cases, the technology providers aren't necessarily experts in trial design or have the clinical research expertise that we're looking for. And the fourth was ensuring the validity of the home data collection. And some ways to really mitigate this is to make sure that you have the correct support in the home, whether that's a phlebotomy specialist or a home healthcare associate, or even have local providers that can secure some of the key data assessments. Thanks very much, and I will now turn it over to Mira to give us an overview of where we are with the Radial study.
Yes, thank you, Kim. So indeed, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Radial study in the next 7 to 10 minutes, and I'm really pleased to be able to present this proof of concept study we intend to perform to you today. And it's really thanks to a huge effort from many people in our consortium that our study has really taken shape. And we're now at the stage of determining the more detailed operational aspects of the study. So there's a lot more to share with you at this stage. Just as a reminder that the reason we are setting up this study is really because most of the expected or anticipated benefits of DCTs, of decentralized clinical trials, have not been demonstrated to date. And also there are still concerns about some aspects regarding quality, safety, and acceptability of these trial approaches. So therefore, in the Radial study, which is the name of the study we intend to perform, we want to do a direct comparison between conventional site-based and the newer hybrids and fully decentralized approaches. And this can really provide the sound evidence regarding the scientific and operational quality of these approaches that we are looking for. And it was really great to read that such a direct comparison was also recommended in the guidance of the Danish Medicines Agency on decentralized approaches. As such, the study we will perform is of course quite different from most clinical trials. We propose a 3-arm study, as you can read here, but it's with the same clinical intervention in each arm, which is a switch to Toujeo for people with type 2 diabetes who are insufficiently controlled on their current insulin treatment. But all 3 arms will have a different operational strategy with a different participant investigator interaction and different use of technology in the 3 arms. And I'll show you those 3 arms in more detail in one of the later slides. As you can see in the next slide, we plan to submit this study in 8 European countries. So it's really a pan-European study. You can see that in the picture. Another important point is that in contrast to usual clinical trials, our primary endpoints will actually be key performance indicators. And these key performance indicators have really been selected through a modified Delphi process with a group of experts to, on one hand, they have been selected to explore the potential benefits, which I just mentioned, of DCTs. So in that respect, we're going to look at subject retention, possible larger diversity of the populations, etc. And on the other hand, really to evaluate the acceptability of DCT approaches by measuring variables related to, for example, data quality, safety oversights. Another, I think, important point to highlight is that there has a technology package has been selected for the Radial study that has been done after a lot of work from the tech work package, which is a detailed tech scan, an RFP, a very, very thorough assessment procedure. And the tech package includes, for example, telemedicine and smart compliance measures. We are currently at the stage of contracting the vendors for that. And we are very keen to have our consortium experts to present more details on this in our next webinar. So for today, I will now show you what the arms of the study look like in a bit more detail. And I realize this is a very busy slide and I don't have a pointer, but I will try and walk you through it. So on the top, you can see that there is a site-based part A in the Radial study, in which patients enter the study in the conventional way through a clinical site, and they are subsequently randomized to either the conventional or the hybrid arm. And then below, you can see that there's a parallel study part B, which is really fully remote from enrollment through follow-up until study end. And there's a couple of other things I want to highlight in these slides. As you can see, and that requires a bit of an explanation, but part A is randomized, and we do that to be able to derive causal inference from the approaches. However, you can also see that part B is a parallel arm, but not part of the randomization. And that's really because what we want to show with this study is that if a future trial would be conducted completely remote instead of conventional, would that still render similar scientific and operational quality as a site-based approach? And with that, of course, similar trust in the outcomes of that trial. And as such, we need to be able to compare the fully decentralized approach as a whole with the conventional approach. And we could never achieve that if we had to randomize across all 3 arms, because in that case, we wouldn't be comparing decentralized against conventional, but each arm would have like a mix of people who would have come in through the site-based recruitment, which of course have a connection with the site already, and then people who came in through the remote recruitment. And as such, the remote arm would not really be representative of the possible remote population, because all participants would also need to be willing and able to come to site, because they could be randomized to that arm. Well, it's a lengthy explanation. We can talk about more on that in the discussion if needed. Another point I really want to make is that the conventional arm is according to current state-of-the-art trial conduct. We got some comments, people saying, well, aren't all arms hybrid already? Well, we're not going backwards in time, of course, with our study. So, for example, an e-diary is already common practice, and as such will also be used in our conventional arm. And then if we take a closer look at the different arms, you can see that there are a couple of different interaction modes, as you can also see from the pictures below. So the conventional arm, that's the top one, is really a combination of site visits and telephone contacts, and in between, people need to fill in information through an e-diary. Whereas the fully remote arm, which is the lowest one, is really a combination of telemedicine visits, direct to patient IMP shipment to really accommodate the fully remote approach. And this arm has interaction moments where patients are asked to fill in data. So they have a similar level of interaction, but it's a different type of interaction. And then a hybrid arm, which is in the middle, it really follows the conventional site visit for recruitment and enrollment. But after randomization, it follows the remote follow-up, except for a home nurse visit in week 12 and an on-site closing visit. Well, really, it's very short, but that's basically the setup of the Radial study in a nutshell. And I'd like to wrap up with some considerations on this study. First, to talk about the strengths of the study, it really is a proof of concept study. I think it's the first direct comparison between the three operational approaches in which we really test a fully decentralized approach. I think that's important. A lot of trials are indeed moving towards hybrids, but that one step further is much more difficult to achieve still. Then, of course, there's also limitations, as there are with any study. It's one study, it's one population, and it's one tech package. So we will get many learnings from it, but that's why we call it a proof of concept study. It won't give us all the answers on all DCTs for the future. Another limitation is that we can't really solicit patient preferences in the study design. So within Trials at Home, we are setting up a separate discrete choice experiment to learn more about patient preference for decentralized approaches. Another one is that due to the non-randomization between part A and B, the populations may differ. You can see it as a limitation, you can see it as a strength, because it can also really show us whether there's a different group of people or a larger diversity in these trials. And then as for the results, what do we intend to do with the results from the Radial study? I think it will really allow us to further identify benefits and challenges of all of these decentralized elements. And together with all the other work that's being conducted within Trials at Home, it'll drive the formulation of recommendations for the adaptation of decentralized clinical trial approaches in Europe. I want to once again thank all the Trials at Home consortium members really for the joint work on this, and thank you all for listening. And with that, I want to hand over to Tim regarding stakeholder feedback.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mira. Dwayne, if you can move to the first slide. Never waste a good pandemic. It's not something I invented or people from our work package. It's actually a feedback we got from an EMA regulatory advisor to the consortium. And I think with that statement, that person was clearly highlighting that there's an opportunity here as well, in spite of all the challenges that the pandemic has brought us. And as I think you all will know, the field of decentralized trials is evolving quite rapidly, so partly also out of necessity. So never waste that good pandemic. That's exactly what we've been trying to do in the EAGLE work package. So that's regulatory, ethics, compliance, but it actually goes a lot beyond EAGLE. We've been working very close with the other work packages as well. So what I'm presenting today is the work of many people throughout the consortium. We started the year by completing an exercise on mapping the current European environment for decentralized trials. Was an interesting exercise. It showed mainly where there are the key differences across the national health authorities in Europe. And the output of that work is also available on the Trials at Home website. Now, we couldn't look at barriers and opportunities for DCT without also thinking of COVID. So there's been a lot of evaluations ongoing as to what new changes are possible due to or thanks to COVID. I think, as Kim mentioned, there's a paper published on the regulatory guidance also that was issued during COVID as well. But I think overall, let's say the first half of this year, one of the key activities in our working package has been to prepare for a meeting with EMA's Innovation Task Force. I'll come back to the output there, but it's really a platform for early dialogue. Based on the output of that meeting, we decided to also move into a more formal scientific advice. That advice was granted by the German health authority, BfArM. It allowed us to go a bit more specific into the actual radial protocol and a lot of the more operational aspects as well. And throughout all those activities, of course, we've not just looked at the regulatory input. We've had stakeholder interviews with ethics experts, with regulatory interviews. We've talked to our patient expert panel, external stakeholders, etc. All of that feedback is right now being further evaluated. And in fact, yeah, the next steps for our work package is really to start focusing on the clinical trial applications and support the radial study once it's submitted. So Dwayne, if you can move one slide ahead. So this slide is intended to show you a bit of let's say, the strategy behind the interactions we had. Our aim was really to start high level, to approach regulators and get a better understanding of what's in regulators' minds at this moment. And so to start off high level with EMA's Innovation Task Force. I mentioned that this is a platform for early dialogue, and I would say it's almost like a joint brainstorm exercise, where we don't have just the regulators, but also payer experts. We had GCP inspectors. And I think overall, the delegation at the meeting, I think, was more than 70 participants, probably the largest or one of the largest ITF meetings to date, showing that there's a lot of interest really in the DCT field across Europe. Now, ITF meeting, super useful. I think we walked out of that with a lot of quite general recommendations, and I would say mainly food for thought. And for us, it also made clear that there was really a need also to discuss all those feedback in a bit more detail. And BfArM, the health authority in Germany, was very active during the ITF meeting. I'm also thinking of Denmark was very active, Belgium, and definitely much more even than that. But Germany sort of stood out, and that's also why we contacted them to ask for a scientific advice meeting on relatively short notice, which they granted to the consortium. It gave us that platform to really go in depth, discuss much more about the technology aspects, the operational aspects, and some of that feedback is then summarized in the next slide. Now, I mentioned also, oh, sorry, Dwayne, could you, yeah. So in addition to that, I think we received a lot of important feedback as well from the other parts of the consortium. Patient expert panel was a vital contribution to really get that perspective of people living with diabetes. Our external stakeholder panel has been closely involved throughout the consortium and really brings a lot of useful feedback on the relevance of what we're doing and how to get this project organized. Our scientific advisory board has looked carefully at the scientific and the methodology aspects. And I also want to highlight the voice of ethics experts, which we're currently further analyzing. So I think it would take us too far to really go in depth on all the feedback that we received, but I would say roughly, I think what came back consistent sort of is spread across 5 buckets. One bucket is not on the slide, but that's direct feedback on radial protocol, the overall approach that we've chosen. So those aspects are definitely being reviewed for the protocol. The other 4 aspects, they are on the slides, and those are, I think, also more general considerations, both for radial as well as for decentralized trials overall. One key area that we got consistent feedback on is everything related to onboarding, consenting of the patient, how to ensure adequate training. And the key challenges we've identified there is really how to be compliant with a very heterogeneous European environment. I mentioned we started this year with mapping the European environment for DCT aspects, and that made clear that there's a lot of inconsistencies out there. The second bucket really relates to the investigator responsibilities as defined by ICH. Key consideration, I think, came back from every interaction we've had. And the key question there is to make sure that we can provide the investigator with all the tools to be able to fulfill his or her responsibility per ICH. So how can we make sure the investigator has all the information to take medical decisions on the patient? How can we make sure there is sufficient oversight on personnel and procedures? And again, here, I think the key challenge for us is to really provide all that information to the people reviewing the clinical trial. Safety and efficacy, of course. I don't think that's really a surprise. Safety of the patient is paramount in any clinical trial. So we heard a lot of considerations on how to make sure that adverse event reporting is carried out correctly, especially if it's in a fully remote setting. We also saw questions on how we can make sure that the assessments we perform in a decentralized approach, that they are comparable in a home setting versus in a clinical setting. So a lot of food for thought on those aspects as well. And I would say the fourth bucket is really everything related to the data itself, data integrity, participant access to their own rights, privacy considerations, and in Europe, both at the GDPR level, but also the national level. And challenges there, I think, as also no surprise really, is about verification of the patient identity, making sure that data are appropriately hosted, and also who can access the data, when, and how much control does the investigator can retain over the data. And then finally, I just wanted to mention also compliance, very hot topic. We had a lot of useful contributions from GCP inspectors, both at the ITF meeting and in the BfArM meeting. One of the key questions there is really if the site becomes in a way less important or less involved with data collection and data processing, how can we ensure compliance, and also which data is available for inspectors to look at during a GCP inspection. That's a bit in a nutshell. We of course had much more feedback than this, but I think it's time to hand back over to you, Dwayne.
Thank you very much, Tim. And thank you all of you out there. I'm sure you all have questions. We are going to open up now to Q&A. We have about 29 minutes left. So please use the little Q&A button on your menu, submit a question, and we'll do our best to answer them. Again, we have close to 100 of you out there. Thank you for being here. And we look forward to your feedback. Let me just start off. I mean, if you think back, everyone, to when we started, December 2019, it was a very, very different world than what we're dealing with now. Obviously, it was a very lovely week in Paris, but now we've had to deal with COVID. There's been all these barriers put up. It's been very difficult. How is the project dealing with the reality of how these barriers have been thrown up? Has our timeline changed? How is it going meeting the deliverables? I mean, how much ducking and weaving have we had to do, and how are we doing on the deliverables? I suppose, Mira, I'll start with you. How's that impacting the clinical trial work and things? Are we still on time and under budget and all that?
Yes, Dwayne, it's a very good question, and it's indeed something we hadn't foreseen at the start of the project. I think on one hand, it made our life easier. It sounds a bit strange, but when we started the project, we really thought a lot of our work would be on making sure people understand the added benefit of these decentralized clinical trial approaches. And that became clear right away. So that part of discussing why these approaches may be of value, that was really taken away. And we could move very quickly to then going to this part that we need to show where there's still uncertainties, as we discussed in the presentation about data quality, etc., where we can really investigate that. Of course, as a consortium, we would love to have those yearly live meetings, but I think for our project, it just highlighted the importance of what we are doing, and we need to make sure that we are not running behind the facts, but I think we are not, and this trial can really, I'm just talking from the Radial perspective now, let the others talk about the other elements, can really drive forward what's already been put in an accelerator due to COVID, so to say.
Kim, anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I can just add, I mean, I think that one thing became clear is that, and we've tried to maximize this as much as possible, is that, and that's what's maybe good about a large consortium like this, is that we were really able to leverage a lot of different experiences in real time about how different academic groups, how different industry were dealing with COVID, because you have to remember clinical trials didn't stop. And so, you know, there may have been studies that already had DCT components built in. Some trials had to adjust, probably some trials had to stop completely, but to some extent we were able to leverage that, that different experience and bring it into the project. And I think for a lot of us, this is really underpinning and emphasizing the need to bring a different model, be able to help patients with the geography challenge of not being near, a large academic medical center all of the time, and really expand access to patients. So I think for a lot of us, we feel like this really highlighted the importance of the work we're doing at Trials at Home.
Yeah, and picking up on that, Tim, from your comment, never let a good crisis go to waste, essentially. Has this helped with the regulatory discussion? Do you think that this has made it easier and people are more open and because of the need for a new approach?
Yeah, I think Kim had a good observation. Clinical trials did not stop. Perhaps there was definitely some impact, but we managed to go ahead. And I think a key reason for that is also regulators across Europe were actually quite quick to come out with updated guidance and exceptional measures that were allowed during definitely the initial periods of the pandemic. I think the paper prepared by Amos de Jong and other people in Eagle, very interesting read to give you an overview. But regulators were very quick. And I think the key challenge is not that regulators have always been open, I think, to discuss these remote aspects. Our key challenge now is to really show them what works, where are challenges still there, what are the benefits and risks of this approach. And I think they're really welcoming us to come with that experience and to show them basically which elements of decentralized trials could also stay after the pandemic and may work even better than traditional approaches.
Rick, anything to add to that?
Well, a lot has been said already, and I can echo what Tim said, that regulators were fast in responding. At the same time, it was also a bit of a test in which we saw still the barriers that remain and differences across countries. For example, there's still many countries in which an e-consent is not allowed as an entry into a trial. And obviously, in this hectic times, collecting wet ink consent from large numbers of patients is going to create barriers. Just one example. So yes, progress has been made. The developments have been fueled by the COVID epidemic, but also have shown what still needs to be done. And for that reason, I think that Trials at Home is as relevant as it was before the epidemic started.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We've had a bunch of questions come in. So I'm going to go to some of the folks who've submitted questions. Thank you. I'm going to start with Julia Hoxa. Thank you, Julia, for your question. Rick, this is to you. Rick mentioned in the beginning that there are options for collaboration to join the consortia. Can you please elaborate which further kinds of collaborations are foreseen? Where do you see the need or potential? So Rick, what are we looking for?
What are we looking for? We obviously this started way back as an IMI project in which innovative drug companies, together with academia and other partners, set out to develop this scheme, and it was turned into a project that also is financed in part by the EU. So we have an initial assembly of parties that have joined to make this work. But we've noticed that there is along the way additional interest and attention by companies or other parties that would like to join in some capacity. And I just want to emphasize that we're really open to look what format that can take. And if you are interested or your company or institution is so, just let us know and we'll see how we can collaborate, because I think that, further broadening of the scope and expertise and dissemination is helpful for this project.
Yeah, and capitalizing on the success, I did prepare a slide.
Great.
Again, you can find out from the website itself. Just go to the trialsathome.com and there's an FAQs, frequently asked questions. You go there and then there's the contact information that people can reach out to. We'll obviously show that before the end of the webinar. Kim, or let's see, Mida, anything else you need to add, or anything you need from the clinical trial side or the development side that we need to think about? Nothing? Nope. Okay, we'll move on. Kim spoke about the challenges to staff approaching trial planning and regulatory procedures in different ways due to specified areas of expertise. Can you please elaborate, Kim? And this is a question from Max Litt. Thank you very much, Max. So Kim, what are we looking for about expertise?
Yeah, happy to elaborate a little bit more. I mean, I think this was really a not just at the site level, but also at the sponsor level. We have expertise in IT, in security, in regulatory affairs, et cetera. And so I think, especially because this study started in 2017, probably the planning was going on in 2016. There weren't a lot of technologies out there to support this type of study, and a lot of differing opinions about exactly what kind of controls to put in place, right? So do you have to, in a remote arm, do you have to follow the patients every day for adverse events because you're not seeing them, right? I think that there was a tendency to swing a little bit more conservative because of the uncertainty. And so there was a lot of differing opinions about exactly how to design a fully virtual arm, how to follow those patients, and what types of extra procedures maybe needed to be put in place, simply because they weren't being seen in a clinic every visit.
Yeah, and Andrew Barker has followed up then saying, did our selection criteria evolve due to the constraints that we were seeing? Did we change those? If you have experience in X and Y, those sort of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the slide was not certainly a in depth of every single mitigation, but certainly selection criteria for vendors has definitely risen to a very solid mitigation plan. And now I think we have the benefit of years as well, and additional technologies that have been developed really to support this type of model.
Yeah, thank you, Kim, and thank you, Andrew, for your very good question. We appreciate that. We have a question here about adverse event information. Someone is mentioning, this is a Niels Jensen. I was in a trial involved earlier this year with adverse event information. It was only collected at the start of the treatment cycle. No information about the adverse events was available during the treatment cycle. I suppose one of the benefits of this is we'll be collecting information as we go through the trial. Is that correct? Mira, yes, you're shaking your head.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think this question probably relates, I'm not sure, to when they had to change the trials along the way when COVID happened. And now we are, of course, an opportunity that we can think about this beforehand. So we're definitely putting in place the right measures to make sure we can continue to collect this information throughout the follow-up period.
That's great. And thank you, Niels, as well. Niels has asked, will the slides be available post the event? Yes, they will, as will the video. So Niels, thank you very much. We have a question here from Francois Chabet. Do you set specific measures regarding cybersecurity beyond authentication for the full remote arm, vulnerabilities regarding data transfer through the internet, etc.? What are our specific cybersecurity mitigation authentication methods in the remote arm? Anyone have a technical answer for that? This is outside of my scope of influence here.
Tim, you're probably the most equipped to answer.
No, I'm happy to speak to it, but it's indeed beyond my area of expertise. What I do know from the technology group working on this is that cybersecurity, I think, is one of the key considerations that have been undermined from day one. It's also something that was highlighted in all the regulatory and other stakeholder interactions. So I'm sure there are guarantees with regards to encryption and other ways of securing these data, but I can't speak to the practicalities, unfortunately.
That's fine. Anyone else have anything to add to that? Rick?
Probably, by the way, Dwayne, it is an important issue. This will for sure be part of our reports on the design of the study once this is all hammered out. But given the interest in general on this topic, I think we should see if we can have, as soon as that information evolves, this information on our website, so people can consult what the current thinking is around this.
That's great. Thank you. We have another question here from a Georgina Strickland. And Georgina has asked, what were the most interesting or unanticipated perspectives you received on the Radial study from your patient panel? So what were some of the interesting findings from patient feedback? Who would like to address that? Tim, you want to give that a shot?
To be fair, I think it's more for Mira or Kim.
Mira, do you want to jump in on that?
Yes, I can. So I think the interactions with the patient panel are ongoing. So there were several sessions already, and I think what was very clear from at least the first one is that very often we thought we shouldn't be asking too much to not overburden patients with information we want. And then actually they said, but we would really like to know better what is the level of disease management of the patients that would enter the trial, and that we would also really need to feed that back to them. So the feeding back is something that we knew about, but we continuously get that feedback that we need to not only think of what data we need and we want together, but also how we give that back to the patients. But surprising for me was at least that they didn't worry that much about the amount of information we wanted to ask, just as long as we also feed that back and make sure that the patients can use that as well for their own disease management. And then I think maybe one of the other things was that we were wondering whether, because this is a methodological trial, so we do want future participants to understand that they also participate to change maybe the clinical trial landscape. And I think for the patient panel, they said, well, we're already very interested in these decentralized approaches, so we see the benefit of that. So maybe we don't need to explain that as much as we thought we had to.
So they've
just
actually
2 points, but there were many points discussed, but I can't go into all of them.
No, that's great. But obviously the patients have been very receptive and want the feedback and very engaged. Has this been aided, or do you feel penalized by the fact it's all had to switch to virtual, or do you think that's actually been a blessing?
Do you mean the interactions that they
Yes,
had to?
because initially this was going to be face-to-face, but now it's had to switch to virtual due to COVID. Has that been an impediment, do you think, or has it actually helped?
I think a bit of both. Sometimes discussions can go a bit deeper if you're actually there face to face, but then you won't get the same diverse group around the table because it's difficult to join in person. And we had a very diverse group from different countries. And I think we maybe would not have gotten that if we had this face to face interaction. So it's always give and take a bit there.
Swings and roundabouts. Kim, anything to add to that?
I mean, I completely agree with the sort of there's a bit of both positive and drawbacks. It's always nice. I think we've seen this in our day-to-day working environments, right? It's always nice to be face to face. There's a connection you can make, but it has allowed us probably to have more and more interactions. And I think the certainly diversity of those people that are actually able to always be around the table has been really great.
Yeah, thank you. We've still got 10 minutes left, ladies and gentlemen. We still have a few questions. If you'd like to get a question in, and if you have a burning idea that you want to ask the panel, please get it in now or we will be out of time. We have a question here from Leda Lelands. Can you please elaborate more on the decisions to randomize only 2 of the 3 arms and not the full DC arm? So what were the randomization criteria for the 2 arms versus all 3?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think to be able to correctly answer that, we really need to keep the overarching aim of the study in mind. And the question is, do we want to, of course, for those trials that fit that purpose given population intervention, would we want to move conventional trials to a decentralized trial model? So in future trials, you would not have these 3 arms all together. You would probably choose to use one operational model for your clinical study. If you then want to know whether in that operational model, your recruitment, your retention, your data quality is good, you need to test the full model. And you can only do that if you put a fully remote arm in. And we looked at many angles of how we can then still randomize, but there's basically no way where you can have your full remote approach and then ask patients that come in through that fully remote approach to also be able to go to sites, because the site might be very far away, or they might be participants who would not be willing or able to come to sites. So keeping that in mind, that it's about a change of model and not 3 arms with different decentralization in future studies. that really explains why we in the end decided not to randomize across all 3 arms.
And not to keep grilling you here, Mira, but we have another question here from a Sylvia Chia, who just wants to know specifically, if we take one of the arms, is it the same investigator who's doing both the conventional hybrid and DCT? So are they responsible for the 3 arms of the trial, or do we randomize both the site and the actual investigators?
So for part A, where that's the conventional and the hybrid arm, it's one site that has both arms. So a patient comes in through the site and then it's randomized either to hybrid or to conventional. They have that link with the site they recruited to the normal process. For the fully remote arm, we will have one remote site in each of the countries that in which we will submit the study, and those patients that come in through the remote approach will fall under that PI, which has exactly the same responsibilities as a normal investigator in a traditional clinical trial, but from a distance. So I don't know whether that fully answers the question.
I think it's fine for right now, Mira. Thank you very much. One of the questions, and several of the questions we've had have been generally about participation. If we go on the website, you've published some results of some interviews that you've had. And one of the challenges that's been mentioned considerably on other studies that have been done through decentralized processes is churn, and which is very high. And there was a comment specifically saying that we had very large patient numbers at the beginning, but then very small numbers at the end. First off, I guess, why was there so much churn, or are these prone to churn? And what are we doing to minimize that churn activity in the actual trial itself? Who can address that? Let's see. Again, I hate to go back to Mira again, but
I think maybe Kim can take the first part, and I can talk to Radial.
Sure, I can. I mean, I think one thing we have to think about is, patient retention in clinical trials in general is really a hurdle. It's really a struggle. It's something that we have to try to minimize all of the time. So that's not something unique to this model in any way. And in fact, our hope is that by making this more convenient to a patient, to their local surroundings, that we're actually able to impact that retention in a positive way. And so that's really one of the key aims of the program.
Tim, in any of your discussions, has churn or sort of stickiness of the trial been a consideration in some of the discussions, and why you're trying to move to some of these approaches as opposed to standard clinical trials?
Well, I would say retention and especially missing data as a result has always been a key regulatory consideration when evaluating clinical trial outcomes. I think it's one of those potential benefits of the decentralized approach, where I think a lot of people in the field really believe that there are could be a big benefit with the remote approach. But it's also an area where we don't have a lot of evidence yet. And I think that's really one of the strengths that Radial could bring to make the proof more concrete, basically.
Rick, anything to add to that from your experience?
No, the latter is absolutely true. It's one of our objectives to gain insight in that. But there's also clear reasoning that by bringing trials to patients rather than patients to trial sites, that you reduce the burden on patients, and that may help, in fact, rather than refrain people from keeping into the trial. So we're hopeful that this provides also additional gains in terms of retention in trials.
That's great. So we have a question here from Sandra Voss. Has it been challenging to identify sites for the fully remote arm in Europe? And are these sites that typically also support conventional hybrid models, or are these more specifically institutional decisions? So what was the selection criteria for the sites? Was it they have experience, or they were willing, or what was the criteria to do so? Mira, I'm going to go back to you. Sorry.
No, we're still in the process of selecting the sites for the remote arm, and of course there is a separate list of selection criteria that they will need to comply with for being able to participate in a remote arm. But it's a combination of sites that also have, at least the sites we are talking to, is a combination of sites that are also able to support conventional hybrid models, but who see that this can be the future and are interested in pursuing that. There are specific sites that already have made partly that transition, so they're already specializing in this area. So it depends on the country, and it depends on what's possible, where also what that remote site might look like, and that may be different in the different European countries, but we're still talking to sites.
And following up with that, we have a question here from Declan Rossiter, who's asked what impact factors such as reliable broadband and internet infrastructure, as well as tech proficiency, have had on the Radial study. Have we had any constraints because of actual infrastructure capabilities, which I suppose makes sense? Kim, I hate to keep going to Mira on this, but Kim, what about the actual internet infrastructure and backbone capability?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we've come across any technical challenges as of yet, but it's certainly important that people have access to broadband. I'd say that there is some research out there that I think we tend to make assumptions that certain patient populations maybe won't have the technical skills to be able to participate in research. When we actually do the research, it turns out not to be the case, right? I mean, we hear about lots of folks who are, learning every day from their kids and their grandchildren how to use technologies and get very, very proficient at it. So it certainly will have to be an aspect that we consider. We certainly don't want to overcomplicate things, but no specific challenges that we've seen to date.
That's fine. And this will probably, unfortunately, have to be our last question, where we are running out of time. But we have a question here from Maria Camilla Valesco. Thank you for your question, Maria. And it's, how are we conducting the recruitment of patients? You mentioned you have some issues recruiting for the first study. How are we actually going through the process of reaching out to get patients into the study? What are we doing? Let's see, who wants to address that? Mira, you're looking, I hate to come back to you.
No,
I guess I'll go
fine.
Mira, and then Rick, I'll come to you too. So.
Again, this is an approach that is still under development, but we're using a combined approach. So for the conventional and hybrid arm, we will be using the site-based recruitment as is regularly done in clinical trials. For the remote arm, we are actually looking at deploying a number of elements such as social media recruitment, but also through the site networks of those remote sites. And some of them have their very specific own structure for recruiting patients. And what's very important there is that we register how patients eventually enter the trial so that we can see where they come from. But it's going to be like a staggered approach.
Sure.
Yeah, there's so much you can study regarding remote decentralized trials. We had to make choices what we can formally compare and what we should just take advantage on. And for example, when it gets to recruiting patients in these sorts of trials, there's a whole set of strategies that you might employ. We're just very pragmatic here to be sure that we can get sufficient numbers in and then be able to address the main objectives of this study.
So unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we're almost out of time. Rick, I'd like to give you the opportunity to give us a parting words
thanks.
here.
As I said in the beginning, it's really a pleasure to see so many online interested in this topic. We do appreciate your questions. Be sure that if something comes to mind after this webinar, you just drop us a note and we'll be pleased to have a look. As said before, we're even interested in other parties joining. This is where you can find some information about the consortium and how to do so. Thanks for your continued attention. We hope to be back with you soon with an update on how the study is going. Entirely appropriate that Mira answered so many questions, because it's very much central to running this study. And that's the phase that Trials at Home is at now, an important phase, but certainly not the end of the project. We're going to run for another 3 years, and hopefully by the end have sufficient data collected and learnings to help to shape the future of remote decentralized clinical trials and all the regulatory aspects of that. So looking forward to discuss with all of you this progress soon in subsequent webinars.
And thank you, Rick. And from all the panelists, thank you for your participation today and for our audience. I had a great audience today. Great questions. Thank you very much for your participation. And with that, I wish everyone a good afternoon and have a good day on behalf of Trials at Home. All the best, everyone. Bye-bye.
So,
Thank you.